It was Pyongyang, summer 1989. The Juche capital had been arranged like the world's largest theatre set. Fresh banners flapped above the boulevards, chanting slogans about anti-imperialist solidarity, peace, friendship, and other things best enjoyed from a safe distance. Into this carefully managed hallucination stepped Emilian, a Romanian cameraman, arriving with a video recorder and a delegation badge. He was not a naive tourist, nor a secret agent doing his Cold War dirty work. He came from Ceausescu's Romania, which meant he already understood the grammar of communist spectacle. In theory, Emilian had come to record socialist glory, to document the socialist camaraderie, and to film the 13th World Festival of Youth and Students. But in practice, he was a witness the last and the strangest stage production of the Communist Bloc. North Korea was hosting a world-class youth festival as a response to the 1988 Seoul Olympics. Our great leader Kim Il-sung, deeply offended by the speedy development of the fake Korea, decided to create a socialist mega-show to showcase the best Korea. For 8 days, thousands of foreign delegates would pour into the most isolated capital on earth, and the regime would do everything in its power to make the country look prosperous, disciplined, and adored. But Emilian was the wrong man to fool. Growing up under Ceausescu's reign, he knew what a dictatorship looked like when it dressed up for guests. Shortages hide behind banquets, fear stands behind applause, and crowds smile in the mass game. For Emilian, Pyongyang was both familiar and strange. He soon realized that he was not just capturing a youth festival, but recording a society performing happiness with military precision. He found fake abundance and real hunger. There was the impossible choreography, suspiciously perfect streets, and a regime so obsessed with image control that even the wrong angle on Kim Il-sung's head could trigger a security operation. This is Emilian's bizarre adventure in North Korea. And before we begin, a sincere thank you to our channel members, whose support keeps this strange little operation alive. Your generosity helps us dig through old archives and explain these Juche absurdities. We genuinely appreciate it. Let's go back to the beginning. Here's a Romanian man named Emilian, a veteran cameraman affiliated with the Romanian National Youth Council and, by extension, the state TV. His title spoke a lot about his credentials and duty. Basically, Emilian was a trusted video chronicler of communist youth events. By his own account, he had filmed a series of youth festivals over the years. In July 1989, Emilian joined the Romanian delegation to Pyongyang with a clear mandate to capture the event on film. For context, North Korea was hosting the 13th World Festival of Youth and Students, a socialist answer to the capitalist fanfare of the 1988 Seoul Olympics. I mean, the great leader first wanted to boycott Seoul's Olympics. Then, he tried to convince the South to build some new sports facilities in the North and co-host those games. Stung by that failure, Pyongyang poured an astronomical sum into the youth festival instead, reportedly $4.7 billion, roughly a quarter of the nation's annual budget. This week-long extravaganza, part political rally, part cultural fair, and part mass games, was Pyongyang's bid to outshine its southern rival and proclaim itself a paradise of prosperity and peace. The festival welcomed 22,000 foreign guests from 177 countries and still holds the record of being the largest international event staged in the Hermit Kingdom. By that time, Romania and North Korea, or rather Nicolae Ceausescu and Kim Il-sung, were a strange couple of tango. Ceausescu was such a Juche admirer. He had visited Pyongyang and was inspired by Kim Il-sung's grand spectacles. About this intercontinental dictatorial love affair, I highly recommend this episode by our comrade living ironically in Europe. We just cut it short here. Basically, hearing about the upcoming mega show, Ceausescu sent a sizable delegation, both to show solidarity and perhaps to pick up some new ideas for mass pageantry. Emilian was the man behind the camera, accidentally making him an eyewitness to all the orchestrated glory and backstage absurdity that the Kim regime had to offer. Who exactly was Ceausescu sending? It was a fascinating mix of communist officials and rising pop stars. The official leader was Eon Toma, the Minister of Youth. The group consisted of young communist activists, artists, and even some future politicians. Adrian Năstase, then a 39-year-old party functionary and Romania's elected prime minister in 2000, was present. Same with Mugur Isarescu, an economist who would later serve as the governor of the Romanian National Bank from 2000 till now. Romania even brought its 19-year-old cultural ambassador, Loredana Groza, a pop singer ready to perform on behalf of her country. Emilian's camera captured these future democratic leaders mingling with North Korean hosts and other socialist guests. At the time, they were just communist youth representatives or party apparatchiks enjoying an exotic trip. Well, it's also remarkable that, regardless of the political system, Romania's political leadership barely changed. Emilian's job was to follow the Romanian delegation through all official events, from exuberant parades to diplomatic meetings and cultural exchanges, and film everything of interest or exoticness. He lugged a hefty late 80s video camera through Pyongyang's streets and venues. Romania's close ties with North Korea afforded Emilian a bit of special access. The Socialist Republic of Romania was considered a fraternal country, and so the entire Team Romania was received as VIP guests. The former People's Army House was repurposed as the Romanian Club and was given to the Romanian delegation team as their Friendship Hall. This space was used to host other countries' youth and put on exhibitions about Romania's glorious achievements. Crucially, one of those visits was by Kim Il-sung himself, a side story that we will cover later. The Romanian club was stocked with lavish displays of food and drink. Emilian had his own North Korean interpreter and even a driver assigned, ostensibly to help him get around, though of course also to keep an eye on him. Emilian's bizarre adventure thus began. He was stuck in a position as both an insider of the communist bloc and an outsider to the Korean particularities. He came from an allied regime, but was still a foreigner with a camera. That mobility and unique perspective allowed Emilian to notice details that locals would hide. His camera became a prism separating propaganda from reality.
Kim Jong-il said to the officials, I share the great leader's motto, serve the working masses and let flowers bloom even on a rock if this is the people's desire. This is my Alpha and Omega. This idea has been embodied in every aspect of the people's living, in the solution of traffic problem for one thing.
From the moment the youth festival began, North Korea waged an all-out illusion offensive, a secret operation determined to convince foreigners that the kingdom was a land of plenty and joy. Emilian, camera in hand, walked into a world of prop sets and actors where every detail was engineered for effect. It didn't take him long to realize that Pyongyang 1989 was essentially a Potemkin village writ large. What you saw was just illusions, and the reality often shocks you if you ever peek behind the curtain. The regime was staging abundance. Some of their maneuvers were clever, and some were quite absurd. At official dinners and receptions, Emilian's lens captured tables laden with roasted meats, fresh fruit, cakes, and delicacies from all across the kingdom. The North Korean hosts insisted on providing mountains of food, yet he knew this was a charade. Through candid conversations, he learned that North Korea was suffering a severe food shortage at the time. In fact, even the diplomatic shops in Pyongyang had run out of basics like butter and meat for months prior to the festival. Delegates ate well at the minor cost of locals quietly tightening their belts. Emilian noted that even the Romanian embassy staff were starving until emergency food shipments arrived for them. So, when Emilian filmed those sumptuous buffet spreads, he did so almost obsessively. In the interview back home, he was asked, "You filmed the food so much. Were you trying to show there was no famine, or was it on North Korea's orders?" He replied wryly that it was his decision, as a subtle way to document the gap between appearance and reality. Another iconic bit of stagecraft that Emilian stumbled upon was the fake fruit scandal. While touring a Pyongyang grocery store, he found a display of gorgeous tropical fruits like bananas and pineapples, and the air was thick with a superb aroma of exotic fruit. It seemed North Korea had everything, even those fresh tropical imports. But as Emilian moved in for a close-up, he noticed something strange. The shopkeeper, dressed impeccably in white, nervously hovered as Emilian reached for a banana. It felt hard. Emilian gently tried to rearrange the fruit for a nicer shot and realized they were all plastic. To complete this magic trick, the store clerk just sprayed the room with a fruity fragrance. So, when the cameraman started touching the display, the poor clerk panicked, unsure how to politely shoo him away before the ruse was exposed. It was a cartoonish communist fakery. Outdoors, the subterfuge continued. Emilian noticed along the beautiful Taedong riverbanks there were numerous men with fishing rods, a picturesque sight suggesting leisure and plenty of fish in the scenic river. But on closer inspection, these anglers were too good to be true. They had brand new, latest generation fishing gear with the best reels and rods that Emilian had ever seen. But rather than concentrating on their lines, many of them just stood around smoking cigarettes while their rods rested on stands. They weren't even holding the poles. Emilian had the epiphany that these fishermen were just actors. They were the extras tasked to make Pyongyang look bountiful and relaxed. Ever the mischievous documentarian, Emilian tried to talk to one of these faux fishermen through his translator. "What have you caught?" he asked. The man looked stunned. He obviously hadn't caught anything. Perhaps his hook didn't even have any bait, who knows? Emilian asked him to reel in the line and show him, but the man had no idea how to even work the reel. He fumbled until some hidden secret police intervened. Clearly, the fisherman's job was not to fish, but to stand there. Some prop specialists probably set up the rods for these actors, and their superior told them to stand still. It was a beautifully staged tableau of pastoral life, utterly fake at its core. As the festival gradually unveiled, North Koreans were trying to will the illusion of wealth into reality. Emilian recounts how his North Korean driver initially refused any gifts or leftover foods, but eventually the man's hunger got the better of him. When Emilian persistently snuck him food from banquet tables and stashed sandwiches in the car trunk, the grateful driver tried to return the favor. One day, the driver proudly presented Emilian with 2 apples. Emilian recalls that the driver was so proud that he managed to procure them. These apples, however, were pitiful, small, mottled, with dry rot spots like wild crab apples. Yet the driver beamed and insisted these were the best apples in the world, and they even export these to America and Europe. He had been trained to parrot the official line that every North Korean product was #1 in the world. What an absurd tragedy! This man was risking punishment to get a couple of bad apples and still felt compelled to advertise them as world-class produce. A similar scene played out when the interpreter bought Emilian an ice cream from a street stall. It turned out to be a sort of half-frozen fermented milk with a chicory-like flavor, not any well-made gelato. But again, the guide proudly claimed it was the best ice cream on earth, even exported to Italy. Emilian choked it down while marveling at North Korea's most advanced brainwashing technology. The hospitality was generous, but it's hard to comment on those gifts. So everything was good on the surface. Pretty school children greeted the foreigners with flowers and perfect smiles. Factories that delegates toured were the cream of the crop, spruced up and fully stocked, with workers chanting patriotic songs on cue. The streets were unnaturally clean and orderly. One could almost believe in this showcase of socialist success, if not for those minor goofs that pulled the curtain. Emilian's footage obsessively zooms in on food and consumer goods, perhaps as a subconscious attempt to document the scarcity behind the propaganda of abundance. The Kim regime spent untold resources on that workers' paradise image, even running up huge debts that would haunt their economy later. The result? In the short term, wide-eyed foreign youth marveled at the lavish banquets and mass performances, likely unaware they were seeing a mirage. But people like Emilian, who came from other communist countries with the same fake it and fake it again tendency, saw through the veneer. In private, the Romanian delegation swapped impressions, no doubt noting how too perfect everything was. This orchestrated theatre extended beyond set pieces to the entire city itself. Pyongyang wasn't just hosting a festival, but it became the festival itself. And like any show, it had its backstage tensions and moments when the real world intruded. In the festive Pyongyang, daily life itself was like a continuous rehearsal orchestrated for foreign eyes. The entire city was a stage, with its citizens playing assigned roles to create a picture-perfect society. Of course, real life has a habit of defying directors' cues, and those unscripted moments provided some of the most interesting scenes in Emilian's journey. Pyongyang's public spaces were orchestrated to perfection. Mothers with impeccably dressed children strolled cheerfully in parks, likely instructed to be out at the exact time when foreigners were touring. Students in neat uniforms laughed in order, possibly briefed to demonstrate how happy to be young pioneers of the workers' paradise. Emilian learned that even family life was subsumed by the state's script. For instance, North Korean workers lived under strict schedules. After work, they had to attend group activities like propaganda film viewings in their respective communal hall. Curfew was at 10 p.m. sharp for all. In the morning, residents were mobilized to mop the sidewalks and scrub building steps at 5 a.m. Even if everything was perfectly clean, people still did the cleaning as a daily ritual. At dawn, brigades of citizens washed the pavement with shampoo, creating soapy foam on the streets. After cleaning, open-bed trucks came. People climbed in and were driven to work en masse. From dawn cleaning drills to bedtime propaganda films, the city was one big show about the perfect socialist utopia. During his sojourn, Emilian heard that children were taught from a young age to revere the leader above all. Every child parroted that mother is the fatherland and father is Kim Il-sung. Teachers encouraged kids to report any strange behavior in their family. So, if a parent showed disloyalty or sadness, the child might dutifully report them to the party. As a result, parents feared their own kids at home. Another amusing detail was the crash beautification of Pyongyang's infrastructure. If a wall's paint was peeling or a lawn a bit ragged, crews would fix it overnight. Emilian said it was striking how much fresh paint and new banners appeared every day, as if the city itself was constantly putting on makeup. Local residents were probably forced with these tasks on some Friday night overwork in the lead-up to the festival. One British eyewitness recalled his Korean colleagues happily reporting how, on Fridays, they'd go build a block on Kwangbok Street for the festival guests. So, yes, everyone had a role to build the perfect festival. The extent of curation was such that some foreigners later remarked Pyongyang felt too perfect. Streets had almost no traffic, and people seemed to only ever be busy with work or patriotic events. It was as if normal daily chaos had been banished. One evening, they even set up a foreigners-only night market on Kwangbok Street with dozens of food and drink stalls. There, international youth leaders could mingle with locals under the guise of an open-air festival fair. Michael Harold, a Brit in Pyongyang at the time, noted how astonished he was to meet his North Korean acquaintances freely at this night market. These were people who normally would never approach a foreigner on the street, yet for this week they were allowed and even encouraged to do the culture exchange. They laughed, shared snacks and beer, and even danced together. It was by the state's policy, but still lovely. As soon as the foreigners left, that tiny liberty vanished, and the locals went back to avoiding outsiders. Harold wrote, "In a country where unsupervised interaction with foreigners was frowned upon, they would normally have been too fearful even to acknowledge me. But now it appeared that, however briefly, the population was being allowed to show their natural warmth and hospitality." The festival's crowning glory was the mass games with enormous synchronized performances. During the opening ceremony, 70,000 performers moved in lockstep to create a celebration of Korean culture. In the stands, thousands of schoolchildren flipped colored cards to form giant images, essentially a human jumbotron. These mass games were a practice run for what would later become the famous Arirang shows. Emilian was certainly impressed by the visual feast, but he also caught the less glamorous side. The regimented crowd is one of the most signature North Korean experiences, and during the festival, this was in full swing. When Romanian leader Ceausescu visited a few months prior, throngs of North Koreans were mobilized to line the streets. The sidewalks were packed for miles with identically dressed ladies in traditional dresses, in only 4 or 5 approved colors, all waving flags and chanting "Ceausescu, Kim Il-sung" in unison. Even in torrential rain, those poor participants kept smiling and applauding with religious fervor. The same thing repeated during the youth festival. When the rain poured, North Korean cheer squads were utterly soaked, mechanically waving drenched paper placards. Meanwhile, the Romanian delegates, not used to such fanatical discipline, looked around in discomfort, covering their heads with jackets. When his camera panned at the cheer squad, they forced big grins. The moment he moved away, they were scowling and wiping rain from their eyes. When heavy rain interrupted an outdoor display, performers scattered and props were ruined. Sadly, months of rehearsal were drenched in minutes. Another highlight moment was Kim Il-sung's visit to the Romanian National Hall. It was quite a political stir. North Korean protocol dictated to the Romanians that when the great leader visits, everyone sings his praises. But Romanian delegates wanted to honor their own supreme leader too. So what happened? According to Emilian, North Korean artists performed a song called Romania, Romania in Korean. This was a song lauding Romania, and by extension, Ceausescu instead of Kim. It was such a bizarre tug-of-war of flattery, each side trying to out-honor the other's boss. Kim, ever the genial actor, likely smiled throughout, but one wonders if some apparatchik got scolded for that mix-up. Of course, not every moment went according to plan. There were whispers among locals about the startling sights that the festival brought. Think of those exotic Europeans, some with long hair, funky clothes, or public displays of affection. North Korean youths were reportedly shocked to see, for example, Eastern European couples kissing in public, or Western girls wearing shorts. Things utterly alien to their conservative, controlled lifestyle. The festival created such a stir that afterwards young Pyongyangites became bolder. More unmarried couples started going on dates in the city, imitating what they saw, and even in provincial towns, people began to dare to walk hand in hand with a sweetheart, which had been unheard of before. In that subtle way, the curated performance accidentally introduced some fresh and liberating ideas. By the end of the festival, Pyongyang citizens had sung, danced, waved flags, scrubbed streets, and smiled for so many days straight that one imagines an immense collective sigh of relief once the foreigners departed. They could finally kick off those pinchy shoes, let the forced smile drop, and focus on their own needs, like sourcing some real food. Emilian Urse's tapes capture this dual reality, the flawless mass performances and the fleeting breakdowns. The city was a staged show. If you watch closely, you see the missed cues and the stagehands scurrying in the background.
In June 1971, he greeted Nicolae Ceausescu, General Secretary of the Romanian Communist Party and President of the State Council of the Romanian Socialist Republic, and talked about upgrading bilateral ties of friendship and cooperation.
When North Korea invited the world to Pyongyang, they knew all eyes and cameras would be on Kim Il-sung, the nation's founding president. Kim was then 77 years old and still basking in his personality cult as the benevolent, great leader. But behind the portraits and praise songs, there was a deadly flaw the propagandists desperately tried to hide. Kim Il-sung had a large growth on the back of his head, often described as a tumor or cyst the size of a baseball. North Korean official media never, ever showed this lump. Photographers were only allowed to capture Kim from certain angles, or they would retouch images in the old style. But interestingly, there were no such restrictions for a Romanian cameraman. At least, the secret police never told Emilian to follow this rule. What ensued was a fascinating game of cat and mouse. Emilian trying to do his job filming Kim at public events, and the North Koreans deploying elaborate measures to block any shot of the great leader's unsightly secret. Emilian first learned of the forbidden lump from festival pamphlets distributed to foreign delegates. In multiple languages, these brochures subtly mentioned that Kim Il-sung is aware of a certain cancerous growth on his head and has been treated by the best doctors, but please consider Korean doctors the finest in the world. The very inclusion of this factoid was curious, as if prepping foreigners not to be alarmed if they glimpsed something. Emilian, as a professional, initially decided he would not focus on the lump out of respect. He didn't want to embarrass his hosts unnecessarily by kitschly zooming in on the great leader's minor flaw. Had the secret police simply trusted Emilian's working ethics, he might have kept that resolve. But the North Koreans, paranoid to the core, assumed any cameraman would be hungry to capture this forbidden tumor. So instead of politely requesting discretion, they set up an intricate charade to ensure Emilian physically could not film the back of Kim's head. Here's how it went down. When Kim Il-sung visited the Romanian Friendship Club, he was to be greeted with the Romanian-style traditional bread and salt welcome and then tour an exhibit. The security preparations were extreme. There were plainclothes guards dressed in identical short-sleeve khaki uniforms with no rank insignia. Several guards, one after another, dipped a finger in salt and licked it, testing for any poison. They turned Kim's designated armchair upside down, scanning it with metal detectors for any threat. Snipers were likely positioned somewhere with a good sight. Emilian had filmed dignitaries before, but this level of multi-layered security astonished him. Security measures doubled, tripled, decoupled, he said. Clearly, the North Koreans were not giving any chances to endanger Kim's physical safety or his sacred image. When Kim entered, only North Korean state TV was officially allowed to film him up close. Emilian was ostensibly free to roam, since he was with the Romanian press, but the hosts had prepared a nasty surprise: a fake cameraman with a fake camera. There was another cameraman near Kim, but this man's camera never flickered or whirred. At one point, Emilian got close enough to slyly lay a hand on it, and he realized the camera-looking thing was a painted prop, a papier-mâché. Why on earth did they do that? He soon understood. The decoy cameraman's job was to block his shots. This prop-wielding fellow had an assistant carrying a small three-step ladder. Their tactic was finely tuned. The moment Emilian tried to frame Kim Il-sung, the ladder-bearer would rush in front of him, pop open the steps, and the fake cameraman would climb up, deliberately obscuring Emilian's view with his body and bogus recorder. Emilian moves left, ladderman scurries left. Emilian pivots right, propman hops over. Whenever Emilian planted his feet to shoot, bam, a ladder in the face. They never said to him, "Don't film that tumor," because they didn't need to. As Emilian put it, "They took measures in such a way that I believed I had freedom, but I just could not film him." The charade was meant to feel like just natural occurrences. Oh dear, another cameraman accidentally got in your way. But it was obviously coordinated. Once Emilian realized the video blocking operation, a little devil on his shoulder whispered, "Go get that forbidden fruit, now." After all, they hadn't even given him a professional courtesy heads up. So the game began. Emilian started feinting and dodging like a guerrilla filmmaker. He set up at one spot, bait ladder guy to rush, then quickly juke to another angle to get a quick zoom of Kim's backside before the human shield closed in. When the fake cameraman moved too slowly, plainclothes officers physically edged in. Emilian noted whenever he found a new position, suddenly a group of men in identical khaki would casually walk in and block his way. They never touched him or said a word, but he was surrounded by a halo of secret security pretending to be bystanders. At one point, Emilian recalled, one of the security men grabbed his sleeve as if to guide him away. Or maybe the guard tugged his arm to distract or redirect him. It was a physical battle, although in perfect silence and politeness, between a determined cameraman and a wall of human blockers armed with ladders and fake lenses. As Kim Il-sung concluded his visit, Emilian had his camera rolling when the leader stepped towards his limousine. Just at that moment, Kim's bodyguard gently put a hand over the top of the car doorframe to shield Kim's head as he ducked inside, an act that inadvertently revealed the very thing they'd fought to hide. In the final compiled footage that emerged decades later, indeed, viewers were shocked to see these rare shots. North Korea's official archives show Kim eternally unblemished. Emilian's tape shows the man as he was, mortal and lumpy. It's a small truth, but symbolically so huge. Can you believe it? Even the great leader had a flaw. If they had simply said, "Please refrain," Emilian would just follow the order. But they preferred deception to an honest request. And that was both irritating and humiliating. In sum, filming Kim Il-sung became an absurd theatre in itself, a perfect microcosm of North Korean image management. Emilian emerged with the coveted shots, probably the only footage in existence from that festival showing Kim's secret feature. The North Koreans got what they wanted too. Their official coverage remained clean, and other foreign media only saw a smiling Kim from the front. Only the Romanian cameraman's private reels told the full story, and those reels, by twist of fate, survived the Cold War.
A man will end up with happiness. As the Korean saying goes, pleasure follows hardship. In the past, I had to do a great deal of work to consolidate and develop our party and make the country prosperous, but I am now experiencing pleasure free from worries thanks to Comrade Kim Jong-il. It seems that I feel the greatest pleasure now that I see the people well off.
Despite Pyongyang's best efforts to script everything, real life was always full of improvisations. The 13th World Festival of Youth and Students wasn't entirely the seamless propaganda pageant North Korea intended. In fact, it became the backdrop for several unplanned and even subversive moments that no socialist director would have approved. These moments, in retrospect, signaled the winds of change blowing through 1989. The first remarkable thing is the human rights protest. During the grand opening ceremony at May Day Stadium, with Kim Il-sung presiding and tens of thousands performing, a sudden disruption occurred in the sea of choreographed unity. A group of Western activists, later identified as Danes, shocked the hosts by unfurling a banner in the stands that denounced North Korea's human rights abuses. One eyewitness recounts a sign reading, "Let Amnesty In," an appeal for Amnesty International's access to the Kingdom. For a regime that prided itself on absolute control, this was a nightmare. Security intervened quickly. According to a later investigation, 3 Danish protesters were involved. 2 were promptly detained and later deported. The banner vanished as soon as it appeared. It was so swift that most North Koreans in the stadium probably had no idea what happened. The show moved on. But foreign delegates and press certainly noticed the commotion. One might imagine our executive producer, Kim Jong-il, screaming to propaganda officers, "Who gave these imperialist stooges a ticket?" Another unscheduled event was a protest against Ceausescu. At one point, in a gathering, some Romanian delegates began chanting against Ceausescu. It's not well documented, but Emilian hinted that Romanian participants felt embarrassed by the over-the-top cult around Kim, and they themselves were on the brink of disillusionment with Ceausescu. In one discussion, a few voices purportedly shouted criticisms of the Romanian dictatorship. The Romanians had seen the extreme personality cult in Pyongyang and perhaps thought, "We're heading the same way, and this is too much." So the festival ironically became a place where Eastern Bloc youth shared not just friendship, but grievances against dictatorship. Another example. A Soviet delegate recalled that the Moscow youth openly discussed the wave of change with others, and some Eastern Europeans wore symbols of reform on their clothes. North Korea tried to prevent politically inappropriate materials, but ideas nonetheless spread. It inadvertently let young communists compare their limited freedom. In effect, an off-script thought is just as dangerous to a regime as off-script actions. The next festival highlight came from the capitalist South. If there was one truly show-stealing figure, it was Lim Soo-kyung. This 23-year-old South Korean student did the unthinkable. She traveled illegally to North Korea via East Germany to attend the festival as a self-declared representative of the South's radical left-wing youth. Lim was part of a dissident student organization that believed in Korean reunification. By coming to Pyongyang, she directly violated South Korea's national security law, which forbade citizens from visiting the North. North Korea immediately anointed her Tong-il-uikot, the flower of unification. She was paraded, literally and figuratively, as living proof that even a South Korean would embrace the North's call for unity. She stood out in traditional Korean hanbok attire and gave multiple speeches about peace. What a propaganda coup from the South! However, the off-script element is that her story didn't end in Pyongyang's glow. After the festival, Lim Soo-kyung trekked back to South Korea via the 38th parallel, held a press conference at the border, and was promptly arrested by South Korean authorities. She eventually served a prison term for her unauthorized trip. North Korea kept her in the headlines, condemning the South for jailing this flower of unification. For months, North Korean media juxtaposed Lim's smiling images in Pyongyang with footage of her in an orange prison jumpsuit and handcuffs in Seoul. Look, Pyongyang told its people, the South incarcerates a young girl who only wanted reunification. See how evil they are. Lim Soo-kyung's presence was a genuine disruption of the scripted narrative. She was a wild card neither Kim nor the South Korean regime ever expected. To many participants, Lim's journey embodied the idealism the festival preached. Lim literally risked her life in prison for a festival themed on peace and friendship. Afterwards, she served 3 years in prison before being released on parole in December 1992. On a more subtle level, the festival inadvertently exposed North Koreans to foreigners and foreign ideas in a way that broke the spell of isolation. What happened were the thousands of casual conversations, dances, exchanges of addresses, or even rumored forbidden romances. Simple things like pin trading became gateways to interaction. Soviet delegates exchanged badges and coins with all comers. North Korean minders had to allow a degree of mingling to maintain the festival's friendly atmosphere. And so, for the first time, many young North Koreans heard frank, non-flattering words toward the Kimdom. Western participants might ask a local, "Do you like American music?" or "Are you allowed to travel?" These innocent questions were earth-shaking to a North Korean. Eastern Europe already had some fresh democratic reforms at home, and its representatives might candidly mention that communism was changing or failing in their countries. Imagine a North Korean art student hearing from a Polish peer that solidarity just won elections, or a Hungarian saying their border with Austria was opening. Those ideas were explosive. Pyongyang's official line was that socialism was strong and beating imperialists. But here were fellow socialists hinting that not all was well in the workers' paradise beyond. The cracks in the facade widened. North Korean youths saw that foreign students carried cameras, walked arm in arm with the opposite sex with denims. A South American delegate might give a local her Beatles cassette tape out of goodwill, and perhaps that local dared to listen later in private, hearing music from a world forbidden to him. A later defector named Kang Myong-do revealed that the security services invested in high-tech Japanese bugging devices to monitor festival goers. Even so, they couldn't stop the spread of ideas. Western media at the time largely dismissed the festival as a propaganda stunt, a total socialist failure. They pointed out that despite the pomp, North Korea failed to fundamentally improve its international standing. The regime still lived under constant paranoia. The Los Angeles Times wrote that Pyongyang was giving the world a peek in, but it was also an attempt to woo the West, which ultimately didn't resolve any geopolitical troubles. In that sense, the goal of making North Korea great again wasn't achieved. The unexpected outcome was that the North Korean people got a peek out. Lastly, let's consider the irony of the festival's timing. July 1989 was arguably the final summer of the Cold War. Unbeknownst to the participants toasting World Youth Solidarity in Pyongyang, just a few months later, the Berlin Wall would crumble, Eastern Europe would be in revolution, and Ceausescu himself would be overthrown. The communist world was about to implode, except for North Korea remaining unchanged. In that context, Pyongyang's festival was like the band playing on the deck of the Titanic, a final exuberant performance before the eventual collapse. Soviet delegates in Pyongyang didn't know their country would cease to exist within 2 years. The young East Germans dancing at the Germany Night event had no idea the two Germanys would be reunified a year later. And Kim Il-sung, basking in what was the greatest international fate of his life, could not foresee that his own country would soon face extreme isolation and famine. The waves of unrest had already begun. In Beijing, the Tiananmen Square protests had been brutally crushed just a month before the festival, sending a chill through socialist states. In Eastern Europe, Poland had elected a non-communist government in June. The writing was on the wall, even if Pyongyang tried not to read it. In a sense, all those slogans about friendship, peace, anti-imperialism were becoming trivial as young people across the communist world were actually clamoring for democracy, not ideological posturing. Western journalists at the time judged the festival as failing to boost North Korea's image, but historians later suggest it had a different significance. It was the grand finale of an era, a youth gathering right before their world changed forever. As the festival closed on July 8, 1989, with fireworks, mass dances, and floods of self-congratulation, North Korea declared it a great victory. Kim Il-sung thanked the youth of the world and, no doubt, expressed confidence in the socialist future. Delegates exchanged tearful farewells, and the foreigners departed, taking their stories and impressions with them. Emilian flew back to Romania with hours of videotape. Little did he know how valuable those tapes would become decades later. They sat in a box for years, a time capsule of 1989. In Romania, within 5 months of Emilian's return, Ceausescu was overthrown and executed on live television on Christmas Day. The footage Emilian shot in Pyongyang, showing Romanian officials praising Ceausescu to Kim Il-sung and vice versa, suddenly became historical gold. For a long time, Emilian's material remained largely unseen. It wasn't until 2017 that he dug up the tapes and handed them to Andra McMasters. McMasters and her team were astonished by this unique footage in living colour, shot by an outsider with insider access. They crafted a documentary film from it, pointedly titled Viitor Luminos, meaning bright future. The bright socialist future proclaimed in Pyongyang was already fading away. Kim Il-sung died just 5 years after the festival, and his son, Kim Jong-il, the festival's master organizer, had to preside over a starving nation, probably regretting spending billions on a party while his people ate tree bark. The May Day Stadium, built for the festival, still stands as a colossal monument of that era. The unfinished Ryugyong Hotel, supposed to house visitors of the youth festival, stood as a concrete shell for decades. Emilian Erce's camera captured that moment in all its contradictions. And maybe that is the real value of these tapes.